Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Chris here from Meditations on the Tarot. Today I wanted to share with you some of the reading I've been doing about some of the connections between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. This will be part 3 of a series. The series is called Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. In the first video, we talked about some of the connections between Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry from a Masonic perspective, and I read aloud from Freemasonry, A History by Angel Millar. In the second video, we talked about some of the connections between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism from a Rosicrucian perspective, and I read aloud from Rosicrucian History and Mysteries by Christian Rubis. Today I wanted to talk about some of the connections between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism from a Gnostic perspective, or from a Gnostic point of view. So the word Gnostic refers to the word gnosis, and gnosis means knowledge, and it also refers to an inner knowledge. From a Rosicrucian point of view, there's a lineage or a chain of different Gnostic groups, and that this is an unbroken chain going all the way to the present day, and including the ancient and mystical order of the Rosicrucians, or the Rosicrucians. So this book is called The Gnostics, and it's written by occult scholar Tobias Churton. So I'll start on page 154. Tübingen, the truth will make you free. There was a group of men in Tübingen in the German Duchy of Württemberg who saw the kind of society necessary to encourage the illuminated mind to go forth into nature to explicate mind. They were aware that the science of the 16th century everywhere demonstrated the principle of unity, of cosmic harmony. The stone lay, as it were, all about them, everywhere that is, but in the hearts of men. They could see bitterness, hatred, religious conflict, social snobbery, blind provincialism, pettiness, willful prejudice, gross stupidity, corruption, rottenness, indolence, superficiality, duplicity, envy, strife of every kind. If the coming one was to come from the being of man, a new society would be necessary, which would encourage the regeneration of the human being. The author of the Fama Fraternitatis believed that such a society already existed in its ideal form, but that the full and deeper implications of its existence remained unseen. That society was nothing less than the Fraternitatis Christi, the true followers of Christ. Only the spiritual church welcomed truth, wheresoever they encountered her. For the author of the Fama, writing in 1617, truth, the beautiful daughter of God, had been mutilated, scarred, and her body dumped in a tomb tragically unlike that of Christian Rosenkreuz, laid to rest and ignored by self-proclaimed Christians for 100 years. He now believed her time had come, and it was time for an exhumation. Johann Valentin André, 1586 to 1654, was the grandson of Jacob André, a pioneer of the Lutheran Reformation, whose seventh son, Johann, became a Lutheran pastor with a strong interest in alchemy, an interest which Martin Luther himself had advocated. The family crest consisted of a red St. Andrew's cross with roses between the cross's arms. Johann's son, Johann Valentin, was a dreamy, humorous, and sensitive child who would himself follow his father into the theological ministry. It would take a strong sense of humor to look squarely into the face of a century of Lutheran Reformation, only to realize that it had been betrayed by factionalism and doctrines which had failed to regenerate the hearts of Christians. André realized that significant changes cannot be administered externally unless there is an inward transformation which enables man to receive them. This was where ecclesiastical law had let the Christian gospel down. A second reformation was necessary. This time all knowledge would come into its purview, and this time the change would have to come from within. The house of the Holy Spirit was about to open her doors. Sophia, the Lady of the Stars, the divine wisdom, the fame of the fraternity was about to blow a fanfare which would shake the continent. Thanks to the recent brilliant research of European scholars such as Carlos Gilli and Roland Egenhofer, we can now be almost certain that Johann Valentin Andre wrote a document called the Fama Fraternitatis in the first months of 1610. It was to be circulated in manuscript form to a select number of seekers after the Philosopher's Stone and those concerned with spiritual unity in terms of the Christo-Hermetic revelation. The Fraternity of the Rose Cross was a dream shared also in the hearts and minds of Andre's closest friends, among whom were the spiritual giant Tobias Hess, very likely the model for Christian Rosenkreuz, and Christoph Bosolt, another senior member of Tübingen of exceptionally wide learning. One of the first to receive a copy of the Fama from a house of a doctor of Tübingen, without any doubt Tobias Hess, was Prince Augustus van Anhalt, whose castle was at Plotzkau near Magdeburg in northeastern Germany. Augustus was in touch with the great underground movement of alchemists, Hermetic scholars, and spiritual Christians, torch carriers for the endangered Renaissance, as well as fellow nobles such as the Landgrave Moritz von Hessen and Duke Frederick of Württemberg. The full extent of this network is now only coming to light. It is creating an extraordinary picture. In the castle of Augustus van Anhalt was a secret printing press. Secret because he was supposed to be an orthodox Calvinist, and the works printed at Plotzkau were not. He thus contributed to the underground transmission of such condemned authors as Schweckenfield, Weigel, Frank, and their followers, who had begun to seek alchemical magical expressions of the earlier radical spiritual movements. Dr. Carlos Gilli has discovered in Hanover a folio of over 1,000 pages with notes by Anhalt's agent Karl Weidmann, formerly secretary to the Prague-based Edward Kelly before the latter's fall in 1595, covering the years 1610 to 1630. There are many letters from Augusta van Anhalt to Karl Weidmann, covering the years 1611 to 1614. In one of these letters, Augustus writes to Weidmann that he has received a copy of the Fama, and he might be interested in printing it, but is still unsure of its veracity. He asks Weidmann or Weidmann's friend, the alchemist and notary public to the Archduke Maximilian, Adam Hasselmayer, to write an answer to it. It is hoped that by Augustus that a pure-hearted response will elicit the appearance of a genuine Rose-Cross brother. Prince Augustus von Anhalt is hooked. The scene changes to Heiligengrotz in Tyrol. The year is 1612. Adam Hasselmayer writes the first known response to the manuscript of the Fama Fraternitatis in 1612. He compares the fraternity of the Rose Cross to the Jesuits, declaring that the Rosicrucians are the true society of Jesus, and that their appearance is a sign that the old world has come to an end. The Jesuit Giuranani tricks Hasselmayer into arrest in Innsbruck, and he is led in chains to Genoa, where he is made a galley slave on the run between Genoa and Messina. He will be released in 1616 in a deal involving Augustus van Anhalt and Antonio de Medici. While in the galley, Adam Hasselmayer writes a commentary on John Dee's Mona Hieroglyphica, which he accidentally drops in the sea. Before his arrest, Hasselmayer had given his papers, including doubtless the manuscript of the Fama, to Benedictus Figulus, Paracelsian alchemist and editor of the second edition of Kuhnrath's Amphitheatrium Sapientiae Acernae, first published in 1598, a man described by Andre as an adventurer and a charlatan, and a friend or acquaintance of Tobias Hess, the great Paracelsus-influenced doctor, lawyer, theologian, and co-author of the Confessio Fraternitatis. Figulus himself was made subject to an arrest warrant in Friedenberg. It should be noted that there were influential persons who believed that followers of Paracelsus should be executed. He fled to Marburg, where he deposited his manuscripts with Raphael Eglin, a favorite alchemist of the Landgrave Moritz von Hessen, who was based at Kassel. Hasselmayer's manuscripts are now with those of Eglin at Kassel. Kassel's printer, Wilhelm Wessel, printed the Fama Fraternitatis in 1614. A professor from Gießen was probably the publisher. We do not yet know why this was done. We know that by this singular act, the Tübingen Circle lost control of the movement and the furor began. André's outspokenness on the failure, as he saw it, of the Reformation, the perversion of learning in a corrupt university system, his ostracism by many of his old friends and academic colleagues, gross misunderstanding of the Fama, and the identification of him with the scandal of a brotherhood, which many would choose to see as somehow satanic, led him to many statements which disassociated himself from the fictitious Rosicrucian brotherhood. It was widely thought that the Rosicrucians were invisible. In the eyes of the world, they always would be. For what are the eyes of the world? André did not give up the effort of making men see. After his Rosicrucian period, he went on to make explicit his spiritual Christianity in a series of works which, while not having the mystique of the Fama, did express the most profound and liberating theology. We are losing a great deal by not having translations of them from the Latin. The 20th century has not equaled them in power, let alone surpassed them in insight. In his own day, most readers preferred the obscure works of pseudo-Rosicrucian commentators, for which there was a great vogue. This, paradoxically, André proved the wisdom of Christian Rosenkreuz. The learned are perverted, the truth lies before them, but they do not wish to know. Novelty excites while true science is ignored. The fraternity remains invisible to the world, blind to the house of the Holy Spirit, and contemptuous of its simple rules of love. Here was André's lubridium, his joke and the folly of the world, to go in search of a fictitious brotherhood and to ignore the infinitely wealthy fraternity within them. My kingdom is not of this world indeed. Nostalgia. It was no doubt inevitable that André's original idea should at some time spawn an actual Rosicrucian brotherhood. It would be a long time before it did so. In the meantime, England became a new center for Rosicrucian activity. Robert Flood, an English Paracelsian doctor with an encyclopedic knowledge of the Hermetic tradition, defended the Rosicrucians against their enemies between 1616 and 1633, and was joined by the mystic Thomas Vaughan, who published English translations of the Fama and Confessio in 1652. The author of the Czech prose masterpiece, The Labyrinth of the World and the Paradise of the Heart, Johann Amos Kamensky, or Comenius, enthusiast for the ideal Rose Cross, encyclopedist and pedagogue, was welcomed in England in 1641 as a philosopher who was capable of leading a reform of education and religion there. While John Milton, Neoplatonist and Hermetic Kabbalist enthusiast, waxed lyrical over the possibility of universal reform and revolution before the outbreak of civil war, Comenius wrote the magnificent Way of Light, full of ideas shared among his friends John Dury, the Pole Samuel Hartlib, and their heroes Sir Francis Bacon and Johann Valentin André. The Way of Light was published in Amsterdam in 1668 and was dedicated to the Illuminati of the Royal Society, which owed much of its original inspiration to the ideal of the first non-existent Rosicrucian fraternity. Comenius warned the society, one of the very first exclusively scientific societies in Europe, that they should use knowledge of mind over matter for material ends only and ignored the primary spiritual aspiration in angelic realms. Their work would turn out to be a Babylon turned upside down, building not towards heaven but towards earth. The Masonic phase. In 1710, in Breslau in Germany, a work was published which sparked off new interest in the Rosicrucians. Its author was Samuel Richter, a Protestant pastor from Silesia and follower of Paracelsus and Jacob Boehme, the great German Gnostic theosopher from Görlitz. The work outlined the structure of an organization, the Gold und Rosenkreuz, which claimed to be in direct lineage from the fraternity of Christian Rosenkreuz. It was not the last organization to make such claims. In spite of the claim, the Neo-Rosicrucians were quite different in spirit from the original movement. Alchemy and the secret of transmutation of metals were now central. A rigorous puritanical pietism also played a more significant role. Above all, while Andre and his followers had seen no conflict between science and religion, the new movements regarded themselves as preserving an ancient tradition to which the new mechanical philosophy and growing Enlightenment movement was frequently deemed to be inimical. Many, but by no means all, of its members were consciously reactionary and would see the Gold und Rosenkreuz as a weapon to be used, politically if necessary, against what were, with reason, considered to be dangerous new ideas. It is highly significant that one of the very first initiates to Freemasonry was Elias Ashmole, founding member of the Royal Society, de-enthusiast, and would-be Rosicrucian. He copied out the Fama by hand and penned a fervent prayer of request to be admitted to the fraternity. The great Ashmole was initiated at the country house at Warrington, Lancashire, in 1646. This is significant because in spite of much research, little that is solid can be maintained as to the history of speculative masonry before the advent of Rosicrucianism. Equally, it cannot yet be established whether Freemasonry owes its origin to the Rosicrucian movement. What is certain is that many of Freemasonry's foremost members have shown great interest in Rosicrucianism, to the extent of establishing specifically Rosicrucian grades within the lodge system, particularly on the continent. Obviously, the idea of a fraternity existing beyond racial and to an extent ideological boundaries is implicit in Rosicrucianism, as is the concept of initiation, spiritual illumination, and practical social idealism. An organization promoted in secrecy was bound to cause confusion as to its original history and fundamental intentions, and this confusion is still shared among many. Christ's own teachings on the subject can be seen as ambiguous. While one is enjoined not to hide one's light under a bushel, some activities, such as prayer, are thought of as best done in private, while Jesus reserves some teachings to his closest disciples. There is, of course, a difference between privacy and secrecy. Secrecy can become a cloak for simple fear of persecution and may become obsessional. The matter is not as simple as some hostile writers suggest. It may be said that Masonry, in its higher grades, had not only attempted a revolution within the human being, but in doing so has kept alive much of the esoteric tradition, as well as traditions of the liberty of man the microcosm, which might otherwise have perished through the prejudice of sex. The largest, according to Kristofer, being the world itself, and the raisins d'etat of fearful states which have failed to see what is sovereign and what is sovereignty. Another, Masonry, has fallen foul of the rational great architect image of God, or the demiurge. Power corrupts, and the Fraternitatis Christi has no truck with the values of the word. The risk of using spiritual energies for worldly gain are plain to see for all those who so lose their souls in attempting to save themselves. The first solid evidence for a working Gold und Rosenkreuz organization was discovered in Hungary among the archives of the Festikits family by Ludwig Gabafi in 1893. This is a document entitled Aurum Velis se Lunara Fratem Rosicrucis, 1761. It shows a hierarchical system founded in 1757, influenced by Freemasonry and linked with the same. 1757 was also the year in which William Blake was born and the year of the inauguration of the Swedish prophet Emanuel Swedenborg. Thought would be the new age of spirituality and the beginning of the end of materialism. Blake's principal mentors, other than his own innocence and experience, were Bohm, Paracelsus, and in early years, Swedenborg. The aforesaid document outlined the 9 grades of Junior, Theoreticus, Practicus, Philosophus, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus, Magister, and Magus. These grades were to form the basis of grade systems of Masonic or quasi-Masonic Rosicrucian system, which have continued to the present day. The system presented inherent problems which have beset such organizations ever since, the greatest being that of authority. Much of the mystique relies upon the supposed existence of secret masters or unknown superiors who have separated themselves from the ties of earth and dwell, if not in the Himalayas, in other realms of being accessible only to the highest initiates. These superiors, later called the secret chiefs, seem to be a conflation of the Gnostic Archon theory, and may therefore be demonic. Supercelestial angelic theory, and of course those absent brothers of the Rose Cross, and take the place of the saints of orthodoxy, who may be sought for guidance. The whole picture is clearly enunciated in The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary by Karl von Eckenhartsen, a seminal work in the development of neo-Gnosticism. Worldly intelligence seeks this sanctuary in vain. In vain also do the efforts of malice strive to penetrate these great mysteries. All is undecipherable to him who is not prepared. He can see nothing, read nothing in the interior. All goes well until there is a scandal or dispute about the direction of the order. At such time the superiors are sought, always in vain, when frequently a mystagogue appears who claims that he or she has opened a direct line to a new archon and is to be obeyed thereon. This type of circumstance, coupled with the harassment of rationalists and politically radical rivals, Adam Weishaupt of Engel's Order of the Illuminati, is what led to the effective dissolution of the German Gold und Rosenkreuz on the 7th of April, 1792. Similar problems would beset Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society and the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded from out of the Masonic Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia in 1888 by Dr. William Wynne Westcott, Dr. W.R. Woodman, and Samuel Liddell Mathers. Strange perhaps that a conception intended to eradicate the sectarian mentality should be so frequently haunted by it. So that was Tobias Churton from his book The Gnostics, and he makes some really good points there about some of these different secret societies having these schisms and breaking up into different factions, and it's some of that takes this Gnostic chain and starts breaking the linkage and starts going off in different directions. But from a Rosicrucian point of view, it's still one solid chain, even when there are these schisms and the name of a group will change from this to that, or a group will splinter into 3 or 4 different groups. So there are 3 different types. There are 3 different types of Rosicrucianism. There's what's called Masonic Rosicrucianism, which is a society of Rosicrucians that's only open to Master Masons, and there's what's called Christian Rosicrucianism, where Rosicrucian ideals are part of their ceremonial celebrations and philosophy, but at the same time there's a very Christian point of view. There's the third type of Rosicrucianism is called Initiatic Rosicrucianism. So the Amorc, the modern Rosicrucian society, or the ancient and mystical order Rosicrucians, would be considered an initiatic type of Rosicrucianism. Thank you for taking your time to watch my video. If you would like, share, and subscribe, that'd be really great. I appreciate you helping me get my YouTube channel off the ground. Thanks for watching. Peace profound, and L.V.X.